What's up, everybody? Welcome on back to another episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. I am your host, Bloody Bill Vox. I'm recording this episode a few days early because as this episode drops, it's Thanksgiving Eve. Everybody's running around like a turkey with their head cut off as everybody gets prepped for their big holiday meals. And as I record this episode, I've been recording on Mondays, but it's actually the Friday before. And I've been up since 3 o'clock this morning. Now, the benefit to that is because I woke up so early, I started next week's work early. Like for my own personal stuff. All of the Challenge 64 episodes that you can find at youtube.com/@BloodyBillVox are already edited, recorded, scheduled, the whole 9 yards. We're done through November 25th. And as I record this episode, that'll take care of the podcast for the holiday week. So I won't have to do any work again until November 25th. So even as this episode drops, I'll be enjoying a few days of no real work unless there's some, leftover stuff from the clip files or leftover things from the weekend shows that may have happened on Twitch in between the recording of this episode and it being posted. There may be some little tiny stuff, but as far as all the heavy lifting goes, it's going to be done before the holiday week begins. So good times, and I hope other people are able to enjoy some holiday time off. I just found out from my day job that I'll have 2 days off, and I'm pretty sure that last year I only had Thanksgiving off and had to work the day after Thanksgiving, which is no big deal to me. It's not even like a major. It's not a major holiday for me. It's not a major shopping holiday. I've always been pretty lucky that my kids are not. My kids are not into the crazy trendy stuff, so I don't have to be worried about Black Friday deals on AirPods and this, that, and the other thing. So it's good. Get everything done before the holiday and enjoying some time off. So I hope everybody is able to do something similar. And if you're not able to take time off, I hope you're able to get through this quickly, especially if you're in food service or retail. Food service workers, always treat them nicely, but especially this time of year. And be extra kind to your retail workers because they are getting ready to go through some serious, serious hell. That's all I can say about the holiday season. It is hell. There's a lot of joy, but there's a lot of hell involved too. But today we're going to talk about something that was a little bit of hell. Back in the year 2007, the first entry onto the PlayStation 3 for the WWE game series, and we're talking Smackdown vs. Raw 2008. Now, this episode is going to be a little bit interesting. Now, as this episode drops, the 16-year anniversary of the game's release happened about 2 weeks ago. I was never really a big fan of this game. So on the last episode where we talked about WWE 13, I wondered out loud, I said, why the hell did I choose SmackDown vs. Raw 2008? Was it because it was the first entry onto the PlayStation 3? Was it because of the anniversary? What was my reason? And the reason I asked that question is because SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, out of the entire SmackDown vs. Raw series, is the only one that I abandoned the season mode, or in this case, the 24/7 mode, in the middle. Because it was like watching paint dry. Playing the matches, somehow the mechanics had gotten super stiff. My viewers and I together agreed it was boring content, and I was boring while I was playing it. So it begged the question of why and how SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 wound up on the schedule. And as I said last week, this is episode 21. After episode 5, when I first started this podcast, I picked the first 5 episodes. Right away, wrote them down. I was like, these are the first 5 topics. Then I was like, I don't want to do this every month. I'm going to see, let's look at where 25 gets us. And 25 happened to run me right through to Christmas. So I was like, cool, let's just start picking games. So now at this point, 15 weeks ago, I sat down and I decided that SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 was going to be episode 21. And I can't tell you why that was. I don't know what my reason was. I don't know what the cause was. Did I just pick it because I was bored in the moment and couldn't think of another game? Was it because the date kind of lined up with the anniversary? As I sit here and record, it has become a source of discussion even within my house between me and my fiance. I'm like, why did I pick this game? And even as the episode description kind of entails, this isn't going to be so much a look back. I mean, it is, but I think through the looking back, I'm going to remember what my problem is with this game. Because I don't have any love for it. I don't know anybody who does have any love for it. It probably has one of the weakest rosters. Even though it was an entry onto the PS3, it does not have any DLC. SmackDown vs. Raw 2009 is the first one with DLC. I don't know. Even as I wrote in my notes here, I said, why is SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 my forgotten WWE game? My brain remembers nothing about this with no reason as to why. I mean, I recall that the gameplay was stiff as all hell. And in doing my research for my notes for this episode, there was a lot of critique that this was basically recycled gameplay. And I agree to the point that earlier in the day that I'm recording, earlier today, I said to my fiance, I said, SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 is like, in terms of the gameplay, it's like if somebody recorded a TV show on a VHS tape, and that first VHS tape is nice and crisp, and you have the right settings and everything. It's a great original recording of a TV show. Awesome. But then your neighbor wants a copy of it, and, either a dubber or 2 VCRs, you transfer from that recording, first recording, to tape number 2. Well, then somebody in that guy's family wants a copy, so tape number 2 is used to make a dub for tape number 3. And then, whatever, tape traders, this, that, and the other thing, tape number 3 gets used to make dub number 4. Now, between tape number 1 and tape number 4, if you're a video buff or know anything about recording on VHS tapes, you know that there's quality loss. And I think that's exactly what happened with SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 versus the original SmackDown vs. Raw. I guess it would have been 05 if we were attaching years, but SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, all of a sudden, it was like the series was stagnant in terms of gameplay. Now, I can't say that the series was stagnant in terms of features and everything else, because I turned it on to give it a quick look before sitting down to hit the record button here. And yeah, the season mode is like watching paint dry. I went into it and I saw what made me leave. I was playing as King Booker, and instead of competing for a championship or being in a meaningful feud. I was competing to be in a movie role at the Great American Bash. Wow, what a story to keep me interested. It was stupid. It was hokey. It was unenjoyable. But earlier, as I went through and I looked at things, I found a lot of different stuff that was actually seemed like it would have been enjoyable without the clunky gameplay. But let's kind of try to keep a little bit of order about things. Let's try to keep a little bit of order with format and all that jazz. Let's talk about when it came out, platforms, all that fun stuff. We got notes from our friends at Smackdown Hotel. We got the roster, which in my opinion might be one of the weakest rosters for a WWE game at the time. Let me tell you. Excuse me, I didn't mean to clear my throat without hitting a mute button, but that mobile recorder is still being a pain in the ass. I think we're having a memory card issue, and there's no mute button on the backup source. So, we're doing the best we can here. We'll try to make notes in the future. Maybe fix this memory card, ditch this memory card. I don't know what the problem is, but I did a format on it, and it's still giving me a write error, but it seems to still be also doing stuff, so... we'll let it keep going. We'll see what that file looks like later. We got 2 files running. We'll be fine. But anyway, hardware issues aside, like I really can't be having the hardware issues that I'm starting to have. I got 2 different vital pieces of the hardware piece of the hardware game here, both starting to have some issues. And I really just can't have either one of them doing it. I can't have either one of them doing it. It's just not, it's not in the best interest of creating content to have either the recorder or the capture card die. And those are the 2 that are flaring up. Like, come on, man. Anyway, quick rant about things aside, because I'm just going to do myself a favor and not look down at that mobile recorder again. It's just going to stress me out. I got my backup source. Hopefully we're okay. Hopefully this show arrives to you in one piece. If you hear the fast forward button, we had hell. Unless I say hit that fast forward button. If I lead into it, it was planned. There was a reason. But if I don't say it, there was some hell. Anyway, let's get into our notes from our friends at the Smackdown Hotel. Release date, platform, all that jazz. Game notes. Like I said, one of the weakest rosters. I was starting to say before I got distracted by the technology issues that my notes for this I print double-sided. We didn't even fill up 3 pages this time. So let's dive into SmackDown versus Raw and what the hell my problem is with it. Let's figure it out. Anyway, it was released on November 13th, 2007. It was released on the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360, the Nintendo Wii, the PlayStation 2, the Nintendo DS, mobile systems. I could have sworn there was another one because I thought there was a note about the first time it had been on all the current platforms, but I thought the number said 8. Hang on, let me go through my notes. Oh no, I'm sorry. It didn't give a number. It said this was the first WWE game to be available for all 7th generation video game consoles. So it was released for a whole host of different platforms. Published by THQ, developed by Ukes, as many of the WWE games that we'll cover over time. And, even my upfront notes for this, moving into the features, I said, I don't know why I chose to record this episode. I got almost no love for this edition of SmackDown vs. Raw. It's the only story I ever abandoned on stream. I even finished the Warzone PS1 story, and that was done by Acclaim. So I suspect this episode will be examining why Like, what happened? Where did our disconnect come in? And I think it really rests in the gameplay. And we saw something similar like that happen with 2K19. We talked about that in the WWE 2K20 episode. They could have made a masterpiece with WWE 2K20, and I probably still would have been checked out in the same way that I was, because, in my opinion, by the time we got to 2K19, it had been a lot of rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And I know I'm in a small crowd on that one, but for me, it was same game, different year. And that is a challenge with these annual titles. I do understand that, but hey, you're going to get burned out eventually. And I'm wondering if the gameplay helped contribute to the burnout on SmackDown versus Raw as a series, because they made improvements by 2009 that brought a lot of people back. In fact, SmackDown versus Raw 2009 is one of the more talked up WWE games in the WWE games history. The lineage of the game, SmackDown versus Raw 2009, holds up pretty heavy for a lot of people, as even 10 and 11 do. But maybe this was the burnout edition, the one where we're just tired. We're tired as all hell. I don't know, man. But let's read the feature here from our friends at the Smackdown Hotel. These notes courtesy of them. And it sheds some light on a couple things that I freaking hated about this game that I rediscovered in my research. But let's get into those notes. WWE Smackdown vs. Raw 2008 is a wrestling video game developed by Ukes. Yeah, we already covered that. The game, it just talks about what consoles and stuff. The game is the 9th edition of the long-running WWE Smackdown vs. Raw video game series. It is the sequel to 07, succeeded by 09. Some of these notes, man. Like, oh, geez, really? Man. But, it takes me back to a college class where the professor said, this is going to sound like a rude statement, but you have to always write as if your audience is ignorant. Ignorance doesn't just mean stupidity. It just means that you don't have knowledge of a subject. So you can't write assuming your audience knows a damn thing. But, I mean, I'm at a place called the Smackdown Hotel. I mean, whatever. Let's see. 9th edition of the long-running series. It is the first WWE game to include the promotion's ECW brand. It is also the first WWE game to be available for all 7th-generation video game consoles. Amaze Entertainment oversaw development for the Nintendo DS version. The game itself features an overall roster of 57 or 58 playable wrestlers. Kind of depends on where you look. I got a number of, I think, 54 without all of these exclusives, which this was a first. And I remember almost wanting to get a PSP because SmackDown vs. Raw 08 or 2008 had PSP exclusives. And at least in the case of the PSP version, you could port the exclusives over using the PSP and file transfer and this, that, and the other thing. I remember I can't remember if I borrowed somebody's PSP or eventually bought a PSP. I don't recall how it came down eventually. But the PlayStation Portable, PSP, had Eddie Guerrero, Jim Neidhart, and Sergeant Slaughter as exclusives to that version only. So you had to have that version of the game to play with Eddie, to play with the Anvil, and to play with Sergeant Slaughter. So that's a reason that I would speculate, looking back, why I was irritated with this game, especially having Eddie Guerrero locked to a handheld. Like, I like Jim Neidhart and I like Sergeant Slaughter, but out of those three, Eddie Guerrero being locked into a portable version of the game, I think probably didn't sit too well with 22-year-old me. So the Nintendo DS version, though, also got itself a exclusive. And I didn't know about this until I was doing my research because I was never a Nintendo DS guy. Well, I got to take that back. I was a Nintendo DS guy for a hot minute during my Guitar Hero phase. And I think I had Smackdown versus Raw 2011 on the DS. Maybe 10? I can't remember. I had one of them on there because I was curious how one would play. But it wasn't this one. But the Nintendo DS version had Hardcore Holly as an exclusive. And I didn't know it at the time. And I didn't need to know it. Because Hardcore Holly can suck it. And he could stay over on that particular edition. So, yeah, that's something I learned. That Hardcore Holly. Hardcore Holly. Yes, that Hardcore Holly. Whew. Hardcore Holly. Wow. I can't believe he was the Nintendo DS exclusive. Of all the people that are not in this game, that are not referenced anywhere whatsoever, of all the people, we went with Hardcore frickin' Holly. Wow. That just blows my mind. Yeah, I went off way on a tangent there. Let's get back to the notes. SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 lets players develop the WWE superstar of today into the legend of tomorrow. The number one wrestling franchise in the world delivers more depth and strategy with prominent new features such as 8 superstar fighting styles, all new struggle submission system, WWE 24/7 mode, and ECW Invasion. It's time to live the life of a superstar. How will you play? Well, my answer to that question is not a ton, because when I went back into the menus for this game before I started recording, I was straight up shocked at some of the stuff that I saw in there. There are so many match types. I was blown away by it. Like, we had there was buried alive matches, there was ultimate submissions, there was cage, there was Hell in a Cell, hardcore, ECW Extreme Rules. Did I say parking lot brawl? I mean, it was plentiful. We could do King of the Ring tournaments. We could do Beat the Clocks. We could do just regular old style tournaments. There is a Hall of Fame mode where you have to hit certain objectives, like the one for King Booker that I'm immediately remembering right now because there was a bunch of them. But there's a King Booker one where you have to take any superstar and win the King of the Ring tournament on legend difficulty, and then that completes that. So this game has a lot of modes and gameplay. Like, you know, we talked about these added fighting styles, which I don't think I liked. I think that is part of what hurt the gameplay. The gameplay to me is just stiff and clunky and out there, and it wasn't good. Like I said at the start of the episode, I feel like SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 is the burnout episode. We're heading towards burnout. Maybe this is the episode. No, I think SmackDown vs. Raw was the burnout edition of the series. But yeah, the game, you know, it says an ECW Invasion. There's really no ECW Invasion. we introduce ECW arenas and logos and some ECW inspired weapons, but there's really no invasion of ECW. I mean, even the ECW roster in the game is relatively small. So yeah, definitely no ECW invasion there as we saw earlier with the WWE 24/7 mode and the ECW invasion. So let's rip apart the WWE 24/7 mode because it's the only one that I've ever abandoned midstream. There was a point in time where on Twitch I didn't want to have to think about what I played for a while. So I said, you know what? We're going to do the SmackDown versus Raw series. What does that mean? That means I'm going to start with the first SmackDown versus Raw. We're going to do season modes, story modes, whatever there is for that main feature length play. We're going to do that, and we're going to do that for a while. And I did that from SmackDown versus Raw all the way to SmackDown versus Raw 2011. With the exception being this one. The WWE 24/7 mode, I don't know what the hell they did to the presentation and everything, and you would think that a PlayStation 3 version of SmackDown vs. Raw was going to rock socks, but it did not rock socks. Not at all, not in my opinion. 24/7 mode was boring as all hell. I think it starts after WrestleMania? When I went in, I hadn't even made it to the Great American Bash. We just passed by One Night Stand, which puts me in the month of June. And it's because the gameplay was clunky and the storylines in here are stupid. It says the season and general manager modes of the previous games have been merged into the new WWE 24/7 mode, which takes its name from WWE's video on demand service. Players can choose to play one of the games include superstars or create a superstar or as a general manager of the brand. Playing as a superstar, the goal is to take that wrestler and achieve legend status. In order to do so, the player has to win matches, team with and feud with other wrestlers, and gain popularities. At the same time, they must choose whether to train, exercise, relax, or take part in other activities when not wrestling, all with their own positive and negative effects. This player could only choose to be either on the SmackDown brand or the Raw brand, as the ECW brand was excluded. So, yay, welcome to the show, ECW, but no, nobody can pick you to be on the brand. Why? Because there wasn't a heavy roster. You barely probably had enough ECW guys in this game to fill out a weekly card, let alone a pay-per-view. Because, like I said, the roster is super short. 57, but considering that there were games on the PlayStation 2, both WWE and not, that had more, I don't know, it seems like a pretty light roster. Playing as the general manager, it's similar to the GM modes in previous games. We choose somebody to act as GM. Our choices are Jonathan Coachman for Monday Night Raw, Theodore Long for Friday Night SmackDown, and Tommy Dreamer for ECW. We draft a roster, make decisions, and make it the most popular brand of the three. The general manager is allowed to make staffing decisions, schedule workouts, and events. Now, from the general manager side, the choices are wonky as all hell. Coach, Teddy Long, and Tommy Dreamer. Okay, whatever. Now, the GM mode, I'm absolutely all about staffing decisions, workouts, events, blah, blah, blah. I don't like that from the wrestler standpoint. Basically, what the WWE 24/7 mode tries to make you attempt to do in order to reach your legendary status is basically you gotta work 24/7 because you can invade Monday Night Raw. Say you're a SmackDown guy, because I was King Booker. You can invade Monday Night Raw. You can invade ECW. Then on your off days, you can train, you can exercise, you can relax. From the wrestler side, that seems like too much. And I think myself and other fellow gamers, and I could be wrong on this, and I might be, but I think many of us share the view that was too much on the wrestling side. If you're trying to play as the boss, then that's great. Decide all those little micromanaging things, but in terms of the wrestler itself, I think it was more than the player was looking to do. I think ultimately, um, they sacked their own mode. Like the season mode was just fine the way it was, and GM mode was just fine the way it was off to the side. They come along with this 24/7 mode, and they really sack out the entire thing. So that takes away from a lot of the enjoyment right out of the gate. Like your longevity play is gone, from my perspective anyway, because not only are the modes boring, like competing for movie parts and things of that sort, but also now you're in a situation where you have to do the tedious activities in between everything. Like a more recent game that kind of did something like that was the AEW Fight Forever Road to Elite mode. There are things you had to do within each week, but you didn't have to do them. And there was only so much you could do. So I think it was like it's 4 actions. And some of them help you regenerate your health and things of that sort. I'm not against that sort of thing, but basically, the name drives what they're expecting out of you 24/7. Like no playing week to week, nothing like that. No real story to follow or grasp onto, from my experience. And I think that's part of why they changed it up in SmackDown versus Raw 2009 and introduced the Road to WrestleMania, where they wrote specific stories for the game. I think that is a case of game makers listening to their community, unlike what we see these days with the 2K crew, who will actually mock their player base versus listening to them. So let's see what else we got here for our modes and whatnot. Because there's really not a lot of features to it. Like the match modes are plentiful. Like I said, I was surprised to see some of the matches that were there. Like I forgot that the Buried Alive match was in there, to be honest with you. So that was a surprise. Ultimate Submission, which is essentially an Iron Man match with submissions, but there was just a lot of different matches in there. And I'm sorry for that brief brain freeze, because I was looking through my notes, but also trying to find a full list of the match modes for this game. There we go. This is a nice full listing. My friends, who is this? Neo Seeker is going to get the credit on this one. So let's talk about all the different match types here, because again, talking about this game and kind of going through my notes and whatnot, I think I've arrived at what my problem is, and it was the gameplay. In the roster, I think the roster, the elimination of season mode, and the gameplay recycling is kind of what did me in here. I'll admit, this has been kind of fun, looking back through all of this and trying to figure out where things went wrong for me with SmackDown versus Raw 2008. But yeah, so the match types. Let's go through those, because there's plenty of them here. We've got singles, we've got tags, we've got tornado tag, 6-man tag, elimination tag, triple threat, fatal 4-way, handicap matches. We can go upwards of 1 against 3, tags against trios. We can do King of the Ring matches. We can do 10, 20, 30-man rumbles, backstage brawls, parking lot brawls, battle royals, buried alive match. it does say in the description here that that one was more like a casket match because you're actually trying to throw them into caskets. I'll have to check that one out and maybe include it as gameplay video and answer my own question. Elimination Chamber, First Blood, Hardcore, Hell in a Cell, Iron Man, Ladder Matches, Last Man Standing, Special Referee, Steel Cage, Submission. This is where we had the Ultimate Submission. Tables match, TLC match, Money in the Bank match, and the ECW Extreme Rules match. And varying versions of the cage matches, 4-man, 5-man, 6-mans, tag matches. So ultimately, there's a dump load of different match types. And what might be fun to do at some point would be to compare the match variations against the roster, because there might be as many match variations in this game. Like when you count your, singles, 1-on-1 this, 1-on-2, 1-on-3, 2-on-3, 4-way ladder, 4-way cage. You count all those. I imagine we might end up with a similar number to our roster. But let's go through the roster really fast, because how can we play these match modes without the roster? So here's the roster in alphabetical order, starting at the top with Ashley Mazzaro, Batista, Bobby Lashley, Bret the Hitman Hart, Candice Michelle, Carlito, Chavo Guerrero, Chris Masters, CM Punk, Edge, Elijah Burke, Finley, Gregory Helms, JBL, Jeff Hardy, John Cena, Johnny Nitro, JTG, Kane, Kelly Kelly, Kenny Dykstra, King Booker, Marcus Corvon, Mark Henry, Matt Hardy, Melina, Michelle McCool, Mick Foley, Mickey James, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. McMahon, MVP, Randy Orton, Rey Mysterio, Ric Flair, Rick Rude, Rob Van Dam, Roddy Piper, Sabu, Shad Gaspard, Shane McMahon, Shawn Michaels, Snitsky, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Terry Funk, The Great Khali, The Rock, The Sandman, The Undertaker, Tommy Dreamer, Tori Wilson, Triple H, Umaga, and William Regal. So it's a very small roster. It's very light on legends. It even seems to be missing a good portion of the 2007 roster that could have been included. I don't find any notes on why the roster is so small, but this also goes back to a period in time where just because you were on the current WWE roster in a period of time was never a guarantee you made a game. I mean, there was once upon a time in WWE games where you had 8 people on the roster in the game and you probably had 80 on the payroll. So that leaves 72 guys and gals out in the dark. So, things continuing to improve in terms of the roster. But the one thing that I will say, going through the roster, after going through the match modes, is it does look like they tried to go quality over quantity. The WWE 2007 roster, I would call it in a transition of sorts. You had people reducing their schedule, people leaving, people retiring. You had people coming up. But like in terms of the legends they chose some pretty solid names. Bret the Hitman Hart. Where else we got here? Mick Foley. Where was that run? Yeah. This run here. Ric Flair, Rick Rude, Rob Van Dam, Roddy Piper, Sabu. Like, bam, that's a good run right there. Austin, Michaels, Terry Funk, The Rock, The Undertaker, Triple H. I mean, pretty solid legends list. And I know some of these guys were still active at the time, like The Undertaker and Triple H. So I'll give them that credit. Again, as always, in the earlier years of these games, the female roster horribly underrepresented, but that's just where WWE programming was at that point in time. They were not representing their women very well, sometimes even at all. Just, being frankly honest on that one. So, like I said, 57 or 58, depending on where you look for this roster. So, the ratings for this game. The ratings tell an interesting story. I'm getting through my notes here, And, we'll kind of give a final review. And I didn't write one this time because I didn't know how this episode was going to shape out. Beyond my notes, I didn't know how this was going to shape out because I had no idea why I picked this game. I just no love for it. Why is it here? What are we doing? What are we even doing? And I think what we were doing here is figuring out what happened and why. So it'll be kind of my final review is why I didn't like it and what I might do about it going forward. But anyway, IGN gave it a 7.5. Game Informer gave it an 8. And this is the PlayStation 3 version, mind you. Our angry friends at GameSpot gave it a 6.5. In fact, I don't even think they were angry enough. We'll get to mine in a minute. But here is something I thought very interesting. Now, I've called SmackDown vs. Raw here the Burnout Edition. Maybe the worst of the SmackDown vs. Raw series. The Xbox 360's best rating was an 8.5. You know where that came from? The Xbox magazine. The PlayStation 3's best rating was a 9 out of 10. Are you kidding me? You know where that came from? PlayStation magazine. The best ratings for this game came from the consoles that were trying to push sales of it. Because as I have sat here and discussed this game for the last 40 minutes and change, it became very apparent to me what made me give up on this game so fast. And even in my research of this, I have said that WWE 2K20 was the first game of my adult years that I didn't pre-order in advance to make sure that I got on release day. I mean, I had been pre-ordering the games going back to No Mercy. But I think I have to challenge my own assertion on this one and say that SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 might be the second game of my adult years, because when this game came out, I was 22 years old. I didn't like what was leading up. PlayStation 3 games were still very expensive. And at this point in 2007, I think I was almost fully treated, but still dealing with the same back problems. If you hear me talk about my back hurting, the same back problems I'm having now as having back then. I was only working part-time. Chances are there wasn't any money to buy that game when it came out. And PlayStation 2 values were dropping for trade-in. I probably didn't have that many games as it was at that time. Perfect Storm situation, I think I was more into DVD collecting and other retro games. Like, I remember I had a giant DVD wall in 2007. But this game, I think, is on that list with 2K20. I have no memory of getting it when it came out. In fact, I feel like I waited for a Black Friday sale, bought it, and got it as a Christmas gift. Because the person I was seeing at the time, her and her mother, and I would go out to the stores on Black Friday like a bunch of crazy people. And we would buy some of our Christmas gifts for ourselves in advance. So we would know some stuff we were getting, but we would go out for the Black Friday sale so we could get it. Like, I remember one year we bought a stereo system, that was like $400 off the normal price. And we couldn't open it until Christmas. I think that's what happened here with SmackDown vs. Raw 2008. I think I was all set. And then when I got my hands on it, that gameplay, I'm speculating. It's been 16 years since the game came out. So I'm speculating at best because my memory is not the greatest anymore. But in my, I guess we'll call this my final review, I think the reason why SmackDown versus Raw 2008 suffers so greatly is the gameplay. It's certainly not lacking in quality superstars. There could be more, but there's definitely quality there. It's certainly not lacking in game modes. It's the Hall of Fame mode actually looks kind of interesting. There's a creation suite. There's just a boatload of match types, like tons of different match types. The 24/7 mode is the shits. But there's tournaments, there's matches. You can create a tournament, create a wrestler. There is a lot of good going on with this game. But I think because, and my VHS analogy from earlier, I think is the best example of it. SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 was a combination of them using a fourth dub of the SmackDown vs. Raw original gameplay and trying to reinvent the wheel at the exact same time, making for a very boring and just stiff experience from the 24/7 mode, which is where you hook me personally. You hook me now with Showcase because Universe is a mess. But back then you hooked me with your season mode or your road to WrestleManias, your year-long something that gets us from A to B, or our retrospective that goes across a span of time. And yes, the WWE 24/7 mode accomplishes that, but at the exact same time, it makes it arguably the most boring experience humanly possible. Like I said, it's the only story mode so far in my streaming content creation career, and as this episode drops, how far away from me from that date? Let me do a quick count because we're not that far away. This episode is dropping on November 22nd is the date. So at that point in time, we are 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 days away from what will be my third year in content creating. It is the only story mode that I've ever abandoned midway through. It makes me wonder how much of this game I didn't experience back then because the gameplay was just the shits. In my opinion. It moved clunky, it moved stiff. You've been seeing the examples on the screen. It just wasn't a great entry, and they recovered great in the following year. With SmackDown vs. Raw 09, with Triple H and Shawn Michaels on the cover. We'll cover it someday. Great follow-up. Great recovery. Love the Road to WrestleMania modes. SmackDown vs. Raw 2008, on the other hand, nah. Like I said, I think my friends at GameSpot were a little too kind this time. I would go, I don't know if 5 out of 10 is being too mean, but maybe a 5.5 at best. But something that I will confess, I look through my trophies on this game and I look at the game modes and I say, all right, maybe it's not necessarily a good live piece of content because I'm resistant towards it. But after doing my research, after looking at the game modes, I think I'm going to explore SmackDown vs. Raw 2008 legitimately, objectively. Maybe I'll record some of it. Maybe I'll post it on YouTube. I don't know what my plan will be, but there's a lot of game modes in here. The Hall of Fame mode actually seems interesting. And maybe I played it back then and I just don't remember it. I remember my experiences from every other game except for SmackDown versus Raw 2008. And I just don't know why. Why my brain blocked it out. And maybe as we reach the end of this episode, I think the only answer is I got burnt out on the gameplay and I just needed a year off. But now, 16 years later, fresh eyes, fresh perspective, a little less patience, but a little more openness for games and how bad they can be. Maybe there's something to be done with SmackDown vs. Raw 2008. We shall see. But my final rating on this one, everybody's being far too kind. At my harshest, I'd give it a 5 out of 10. At my nicest, I'd give it a 5.5 out of 10. And if that changes at any point in time, I will admit that I was wrong in my rating and that it deserved a much fairer score. But on that note, my friends, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up for this episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks. I hope that if you are celebrating the Thanksgiving holiday, whatever day you may be doing it. I know some people are doing it today as this episode drops. Some people doing it tomorrow. Some people doing it Friday. I know a guy doing it Saturday. Whatever you may be doing it. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's whatever you want it to be. If you want it to be high energy and just up there and out there, I hope it's that. If you want it to be low key and quiet, I hope it's that. If you want it to be nothing, I hope it's whatever you want it to be. It's the start of the holiday season, my friends. And what a wild ride the holidays always are. And yeah, it's the holidays, man. But coming up on the next episode number 22. This was the legal to drink edition. But coming up next week, episode number 22, we're going to go back to the PlayStation 1 for a little something. We're going to go back to the PlayStation 1 for another game in the Smackdown series. Not the original, but the second one. Smackdown versus, or not Smackdown versus. When I do the Smackdown versus Raw thing, I get stuck in. I remember for a while I was calling it, Here Comes the Pain. Smackdown versus Raw, Here Comes the Pain. We're going to go back to the PlayStation 1 for WWF Smackdown 2 Know Your Role. Again, one of the most talked up, goated wrestling games in history. I spent an entire summer playing this game. And we'll talk about how that was okay until I brought my PlayStation 1 to the beach, along with my buddy Tony. And my mother officially had a problem with my gaming all the time. But we'll tell that story next week on the show. Until then, if you want to follow me on social media, at Bloody Billbox, you know the places. If you want to know if I'm there, search me. And if I'm there, I'm there. And if I'm not, I probably won't be, because I don't have the patience for it. There's too much social media out there. But until next week, my friends, have fun out there. Stay safe out there. Be happy out there. That's about all we can do these days in this wild, wild world. And while you do all of those three things, I'll do those three things as well. And then we can meet back here next week, same time, Wednesday, 6 a.m. Eastern, for another brand new episode of Dropkicks and Joysticks.